Let's delve into the story of the bad blood between Arthur and Lucas Wykes. Gray was once a king and was reborn into another world, starting as a baby. His mother was Alice, a kind-hearted woman, and his father is Reynold, who is somewhat charismatic if you overlook his childishness. He was born into a family he never expected in life. When his mother strolled with him, he thought that he was born into the past, observing men carrying swords at their backs. He was somewhat amazed when he later realized that in this world, magic existed, especially when his mother used healing magic on him. Fast forward, instead of attending the academy, Arthur decided to become an adventurer. He concealed his face with a mask that could alter his voice because he was aware that, in that world, he was still a kid. When his father asked his adventurer friends who would volunteer to accompany Arthur, Jasmine Flamesworth volunteered herself. Everyone agreed, as they believed that Jasmine was the most suitable person to protect Arthur. Since Jasmine came from the renowned Flamesworth family and sponsored Arthur's rank examination in the guild, the process went smoothly. Since a class adventurer, Jasmine Flamesworth has requested Arthur to be taken in for a rank examination. They were able to meet Caspian Bladeheart, who was in charge of that branch at that time. Usually, there is an inspection of the monocore before practical exams, but since Jasmine was there, they skipped that part. When asked by Caspian what can he call him, Arthur thinks about the marks on his mask that reminds him of the half note in the music sheet, which is why he told Caspian that he can go by the name note. In the examination center for Sparring, Arthur saw an arrogant child at that time who told an examiner to not waste his time and just rate the girl as an E-rank adventurer. Arthur looks at him and he noticed that this arrogant child is strong. That arrogant brat was actually Lucas Wykes, who is from the famous family of Wykes. He arrogantly told the examiner that there are no recorded cases of an examiner getting injured while testing new adventurers, and he said that he will take the honor of being the first to do that. Lucas was able to show a decent flame size and a stable guardian with the help of his large monopole. Due to his lack of experience and arrogance, he was ultimately captured and easily defeated by the examiner. But Lucas Wykes was so prideful that he could not accept the result, so he sneakily attacked the examiner. Luckily, one swordsman who is also an examiner was able to parry down his fire magic. However, due to his affiliation with the Wykes family, the examiner still gave him a fair assessment. She acknowledged that Lucas displayed excellent monopole and control despite the faults stemming from his lack of experience. The examiner suggested placing Lucas in the B rank, but still Lucas found it hard to accept the result. During Arthur's turn to demonstrate his abilities, as he approached the examiner, he felt an overwhelming sense of fear. He was asking about the intense pressure he experienced, preventing her from even unsheathing his sword. Then, Caspian Bladeheart appeared to halt the fight and informed the examiner that he would be the one to test Note, as he and Jasmine had close friendly relationship. He turned to Note and asked if there was any problem with that arrangement. The man who stood before Arthur was not only the one in charge of the biggest halls in Sapin Kingdom, but was an AA-class adventurer himself. Caspian had no obvious openings, and the pressure of his bloodlust was heavy, as if he had no intention of making this a normal test. But this young fellow was not even threatened and felt excited about the fight. Arthur uses pure swordsmanship at first, but he cannot show his full potential since he is still unaccustomed to his underdeveloped body. He was 1 feet shorter compared to his past life. Even Caspian, who was an AA-class adventurer who was capable of long-range spells most augmenters would kill for, felt nervous while facing Arthur. Arthur notices that Caspian is pushing him to show off more of his cards, which is why Arthur used Piston Stamp that creates a sudden burst in his feet and boost himself to attack Caspian. Caspian noticed that he was about to lose, that is why he shouted and released a strong wind magic that even pushed Arthur away. After that, Arthur was about to go wild and screw everything, preparing to boost himself with his deviant lightning magic. But before he could release that attack, Caspian put his sword down and apologized to Arthur since he got carried away just to test his limits. Caspian noticed that Arthur was deliberately holding back his full abilities until the end, leading him to assume that Arthur preferred to be placed at a lower rank. Consequently, Caspian declared that Note would be ranked as a B-class adventurer. The other applicants watching the examination were amazed, expressing that Arthur's skills were akin to those of a monster. This sentiment was shared by an adventurer of the same age as them who was also passed as a B-rank adventurer. Conversely, Lucas Wykes, who was also observing, seemed somewhat displeased with what he witnessed. 2 years later, Arthur and Jasmine enter in a group. At this time, Arthur already made his name as the Masked Swordsman. At that time, Lucas Wykes and Arthur meet again and become part of the same team. Lucas, at that time, was in a class dark yellow conjurer specializing in fire. His other teammate is Reginald Bastion, who is holding the hammer and is in a class augmenter with earth attributes. The fat guy is Kryl Masser, a water-type attribute augmenter who will be their tank. Elijah Knight, who was also a kid when Arthur entered the adventurer's examination, is part of their group. He is in a class conjurer with a single specialization in earth. Oliver Hembet, who somewhat looks cocky, is an emitter deviant specializing in healing and was with them. The other girl besides Jasmine is Samantha Tempest and a class conjurer specializing in water. Brauld Landon, who is an AA class light yellow stage augmenter with a fire attribute, is the one leading their dungeon raid. Jasmine was also an AA rank augmenter at this time, with wind attribute dual swords. But when they entered the dungeon initially, Lucas was still arrogant and didn't listen to the orders of Brauld, who was their leader, to save up their mana. The dungeon they entered was infamous for its mysterious inhabitants who had escaped the grasp of death and could no longer be truly killed. With no mana core able to be harvested by adventurers and no end to the fruitless fighting, there was a reason why the first explorers of this dungeon named this place the Dire Tombs. Their leader, Brauld, was able to enter this dungeon last time, but they encountered a new problem. New creatures appeared in the dungeon that Brauld wasn't able to see when he entered in the past. Suddenly, Arthur noticed some anomaly, so he ordered Lucas Wykes to cast a heatwave barrier. Hurriedly, he ran towards their leader to grab him, and Lucas followed Arthur, casting a barrier to protect themselves, and Arthur was able to successfully pull their leader inside and save him. Arthur shouted at Oliver to cast a barrier, but before he could finish his sentence, a sudden explosion happened. Their emotions suddenly turned into despair when, after the explosion from the strong eruption, they saw only Oliver's remains, which turned into nothing but only bones. They lost their healer at that time. As they continue their journey, they encounter large worms on the ground that they must fight. But when a rumble happened, that is when they realized that those large worms weren't trying to kill them all but just buying time for the next eruption. Because of that, everybody cast a barrier to protect themselves, but at that time Samantha and Lucas lost their balance due to the trembling of the ground. Brauld goes to save Samantha and Arthur goes and saves Lucas. After saving Lucas, that arrogant guy didn't even thank Arthur and told Arthur to get off him. On the other hand, Brauld was happy that he was able to save Samantha. But the emotion turns to despair when Samantha realizes that after Brauld saves her, she sees their leader losing his arm, with blood dropping from it. His fellow adventurers held Brauld while Arthur used his fire attribute to heat up his sword and placed it in Brauld's wound, causing it to close up. Everyone worked together to support him, but Brauld was in agony due to the pain from both the wound and the closing process. It was a dire situation, and to make matters worse, they lost their healer. This is how the harsh reality of pain unfolds in the manhwa, the beginning after the end. However, even after that, this arrogant individual blamed Brauld for everything. Lucas told him that he only joined the dungeon dive because their leader is a veteran AA class mage. Still, he was angry because their leader is now crippled due to arm amputation, and they also lost their healer. This made Brauld angry because this guy was not even thankful, and he was complaining after he dropped his own weapon like an idiot was just saved by Arthur. Brauld did the right thing as the leader to protect Samantha, but Lucas, at this time, is at fault since he should be the one who should be vigilant to cast a barrier and protect the party. Arthur told them to stop, but Lucas continued to whine, even looking down at Arthur and stating that he was just an orange core adventurer. For those who do not know, the cores with lighter colors are the strongest. At this point, the white core is the strongest, which will later be introduced as lances. Arthur told him that he didn't care whether he was a yellow core, silver core, or a god himself. He released a strong pressure and informed Lucas that at that moment, he was nothing but a mere liability to their team. Arthur asked Brauld to make a decision before they could move forward. Brauld needed to decide whether he would continue or not. Brauld conveyed to everyone that he would keep going because this would probably be his last dungeon raid since he lost his arm, so he might as well go until the end. He assured everyone that he was still an AA class augmenter and wouldn't hold anyone back. Brauld told everyone that he wanted Arthur to be their leader since he was the most level-headed among them, even in the face of unpredictability. He was the most natural leader. Everyone agreed with that decision. On the last part of the dungeon, they entered a beautiful garden, but a sudden mist appeared. Kryl Masser, their tank, fell into an illusion when he saw his fiancée Clara, who was presumably killed in the dungeon in the past. The illusion caused him to run in that direction and become separated from the group. After that, Lucas Wykes started to whine and blame them again, questioning whether they were truly veteran hunters since everything didn't go according to their plan. When vines began to attack them, Arthur, Jasmine, and Brauld took the front line, slashing and clearing the path for the group. However, when Arthur looked at Brauld, he noticed that Brauld seemed to have lost his composure and gone wild while fighting the vines. Concerned, Arthur went to him and tried to save him. He asked Brauld if he planned on dying in the dungeon, emphasizing that they still needed him to finish the dungeon dive. While fighting, Arthur suddenly looks at his teammates, who are stunned into silence. When he looks back to the front, he sees a large vine monster that leaves him in shock. Arthur started to loosen the sword in his hand after looking at the large monster. Compared to the monster, he was just like a small ant. Samantha fell down in shock and began to cry because the monster was none other than the Elderwood Guardian, an S-class mana beast she had only read about in books. Brauld, too, lost his composure, expressing the belief that the gods didn't truly wish for them to survive in the presence of such a formidable mana beast. Reginald saw his friend Kryl, who had been separated from them, at the stomach side of the Elderwood Guardian. Kryl was crying and repeatedly uttering the name of his fiancée, Clara. In a tragic state, Kryl was already dying, his heart pierced by the vines of the Elderwood Guardian. Observing the dire situation, it further contributed to their sense of hopelessness. Witnessing his friend's suffering, Reginald went wild and berserk. Even Arthur, who attempted to restrain him, was pushed away as Reginald lost all rationality, fueled by the determination to kill the monster that had taken his friend's life. Jasmine held Arthur and told him that they needed to leave the area already, saying that she promises his parent that she will keep Arthur safe at all cost. Arthur told Jasmine that they will leave the area, but not in that way since they cannot leave their allies just like that. Reginald, in his berserk state, encased his body in stone armor and leaped toward the Elderwood Guardian, aiming to deliver a powerful blow. He was able to land a hit on the Elderwood Guardian, but that didn't even hurt the mana beast as its vines continue to regenerate. Reginald was captured by the vines and was strangled in his neck. Arthur was holding Samantha, who was injured at that time, so he ordered Lucas to burn the vines surrounding Reginald to save him. But instead of helping Reginald, Lucas Wykes points his magic staff at Arthur and releases a strong fire attack directly hit the stomach of Arthur. On the point of view of Lucas Wykes, when they were attacked by the Elderwood Guardian, he looks at his surrounding while in despair after being injured from one attack. He observed that his fellow adventurers were doing their best to fight for their lives. As he slowly stood up, he recognized his pathetic state, a condition he couldn't accept, especially being from the mighty Wykes family, a prominent house that played a crucial role in leading the human kingdom to victory against the elves. He believes that it is his duty to stay alive and pass on his lineage. That is why he points his staff at Arthur, who ordered him. Then release a strong fire spell that directly hit Arthur. Jasmine saw the action of Lucas Wykes and Arthur was thrown away from that attack. Jasmine, who was worried about Arthur, runs towards him to check his state, but Lucas cast another spell at them. That spell directly hit Jasmine, and Brauld was also hit by it. Elijah, who saw what happened, hurriedly cast a spell, an earth magic spell to catch both Brauld and Jasmine, who were hit by that fireball. He also points his staff at Elijah, which is why Elijah asks him why he is doing that. The self-centered Lucas Wykes declared that he wouldn't risk his life to help commoners like them. He arrogantly stated that they should consider themselves honored, as their sacrifice would be recorded in history as heroes who bought enough time for him to escape. He cast a spell to destroy the ceiling, making Arthur and the others his scapegoats. He declared that he would tell everyone about their courageous deeds while ensuring his own escape. While that bastard was trying to escape, the Elderwood Guardian attacked Elijah that made him fall, and a drilling vine was approaching him. Elijah, who could not stand, starts to lose hope and was waiting for his end. Brauld, who only got grace from the attack of Lucas, starts to go wild and burn all the vines to protect Elijah. He then runs and jumps towards the Elderwood Guardian and slices its body. Although he was able to cut the elderwood guardian, the severed area began to regenerate once again. Witnessing this, Brauld started to lose hope and fell into despair as the vines of the elderwood guardian approached him. Arthur, on the other hand, slowly regains consciousness. He saw that everyone was on the edge. He looked at the elderwood guardian while holding Brauld, who was fighting for his life. This left Arthur with no choice but to enter Phase 2, Dragon's Awakening. However, he began to question whether he could handle the recoil in his body. The second breakthrough, an accomplishment that the former elven king Virion took decades to achieve, was attained by Arthur in just 2.5 years. It marked the integration phase. Upon entering this phase, Arthur gained new power, but the recoil was intense, even affecting Sylvie, his bonded companion, as he underwent the transformation. Arthur ran toward the elderwood guardian, aiming to finish the battle quickly while hoping he could endure the potential backlash. Despite being able to utilize a substantial amount of mana in that form, his body still struggled to handle the spell. Just as the spikes of vines were about to reach him within inches, he managed to freeze the vines. Using his magic skill called Absolute Zero, he was able to freeze the whole body of the elderwood guardian. Elements such as fire, water, and wind blend together to create a black lightning, which is a unique and deviant element associated with Arthur. The black electricity gathered in Arthur's hand. He looks like the character of Mob Psycho as he launched an attack on the elderwood guardian. The S-rank Mana Beast's frozen body broke down into pieces under the force of the assault. However, after the intense exertion of that power, Arthur fell to his knees, gazing up at the sky, catching his breath in a bloody and weakened state. Soon after, he lost consciousness. The only remaining survivors at the end are the four of them: Arthur, Elijah, Samantha, and Jasmine. They were able to obtain the mana core of the elderwood guardian, and the group agreed to give it to Arthur, who single-handedly defeated the elderwood guardian. This mana core will be given later by Arthur to his father to improve his core and will later be given to Tessia, who will gain its power. At that time, in Arthur's mind, with full bloodlust, Lucas Wykes, son of a noble family notorious for their unethical practices to produce powerful mages. Because of what he did, Brauld died, and many of us got hurt. If I want to properly settle things, I need to be careful because one thing is certain. No matter how long it takes, I won't settle for mere petty revenge. The next step is for Arthur and the surviving allies to head to the Adventurers Guild and report everything that transpired during their dungeon dive. Caspian Bladeheart informs them that there will be a hearing for the case. And then Lucas arrives on the scene with soldiers around him. Instead of asking for forgiveness, he continues to play the victim and tells them that perhaps they survived and managed to escape the terror beast because they sacrificed Brauld. The next thing that happened is that while this arrogant child was talking, a sword flew near his ears, cutting it. After holding it and seeing blood in his hands, Lucas Wykes starts to feel fear and panic. Arthur started to stand and walk slowly towards the soldier while releasing a strong pressure. The soldiers were somewhat alarmed by the sudden change in the air, making their bodies feel heavy to move. Lucas, who was panicking while Arthur slowly approaching, ordered his soldier to attack Arthur. But those guys didn't stand a chance, and they were beaten down easily like they were just an insignificant figure. Caspian shouted the name of Note, telling Arthur that he would be in trouble if he did something like that before the hearing. But Arthur's eye was in rage, and his arms were about to slam the head of Lucas. But Arthur didn't slam him. Instead, he apologized, saying that his sword slipped in his hand and he wanted his sword back. Lucas was in fear, covering his ears while Arthur was slowly pulling his sword. Caspian told them to bring Lucas to the medical ward so he could patch up, while Arthur told his comrades to wait outside. The two of them only left inside the room. Caspian was wiping his sweat from that intense action a while ago. He said, "While I understand the situation, it is in your best interest to refrain from provoking Mr. Wykes just like you did." Arthur slowly walks toward him and he says, "And why is that? I have the capacity to erase that bug's existence, and my identity remains protected from his family. Mr. Bladeheart, I cannot help but think that you are threatening me right now." Arthur releases a strong pressure and stares at Caspian. He asks, "Do you think you are strong enough to protect him from me?" Caspian shivered from that look and pressure in his mind. Those eyes! How many men and beasts has he killed for him to cast such a piercing gaze? Caspian Bladeheart said, "My words weren't meant as a threat. Believe it or not, I am doing this in your best interest. Even assuming you are able to kill Lucas, the Wykes house won't stay idle just because your identity is veiled. They will go after not only Miss Flamesworth, but the people she is affiliated with, the Twin Horns, both current and former, until you hold enough power and authority to not only protect yourself, but the people you care for. I advise you against any extreme measures against Lucas, and even if you are strong enough to bring the entire Wykes house down to the ground, it will be meaningless unless you become strong enough to kill Lucas's half-brother. Arthur understands what Caspian is trying to convey and tells him that the reason he wants to be alone with him is because he has a request. Arthur mentions that Caspian must already be aware of the power within him and that assisting him could be in his best interest. Caspian ponders whether this young man is merely arrogant or genuinely confident, but he recognizes that Arthur will become a significant figure someday. That's why Caspian assures Arthur that he will offer the services he requires as long as it is within his power. The next day, Arthur and Lucas Wykes attend the hearing for their case. The higher-ups of the Adventurer Guild are the one who acts as the jury of the case. The old man was the head of that judgment, and he was a person who single-handedly defeated an S-rank mana beast. The verdict for Lucas Wykes by the higher-ups is to formally strip his class ranking for the sabotage and endangerment of his party members during the dungeon expedition. He is prohibited from enlisting in the Adventurer Guild again until further notice. However, Lucas Wykes hides his smile because the severity of the case could have landed him in prison, yet he received only a mild punishment. On the other hand, the verdict on note is to be banned from the Zyrus city for the duration of Lucas Wykes' attendance at the Zyrus Academy. Although everything was part of Arthur's plan, he continued to act as if he were objecting to make the scene more believable, insisting that he should not be punished since Lucas was the only one who betrayed their party and not him. But the higher-ups told him that is all of his punishment. Hearing that it was only the verdict, Lucas started to complain, saying that the identity of Note should be revealed since he could easily take off his mask and slip into the city, which might harm him or his family. The higher-ups told Lucas that Mr. Note's identity would be recorded after the sentence is over, and he would not be informed of his identity to uphold peace. Only the guild would keep tabs on Note's movements. Lucas started to complain once again, but the jury told him that the decision is not debatable. There is nothing for Lucas to do but only to leave, but before he leaves the courtroom, he looks back at Arthur and told him that if he knows what is good for him, he should be at least 5 cities away from him. Arthur glares at him and said, "Idle threats as you run away make you seem petty, boy." Seeing the glare of Arthur, Lucas felt fear and he could only leave the courtroom. After that, the old man escorted Arthur through the back door. The old man asked Arthur if that little charade was to his satisfaction. Arthur told him that it was believable and thanked him for that. The old man then told Arthur that there would be a time when he would be asked for a favor. Arthur responded, saying that at least the Adventurers Guild knows whom to support and that he would remember this favor. Looking at the back of Arthur, the old man could only agree with Caspian that Arthur is truly a frightening individual. When Arthur arrives in Zyrus City, the 3 races humans, elves, and dwarves collaborate, declaring that the continent of Dicathan should stand as one. This unity comes after the discovery of a new continent distant from the vast ocean. Additionally, they introduce 6 of the strongest beings, with 2 from each race, recognized as the most tactful and powerful within their respective groups. These individuals serve as representations on a continental scale and are tasked with safeguarding Dicathan. They are collectively known as the Lances. The 6 Lances members are Vere Ori, who is considered as the strongest Lance, Lance Ulford Warrand, and Lance Alia Triscan, Lance Aya Graffin, and Lance Micah Earthborn. The last one that was introduced is Lance Byron Wykes, the same surname as the arrogant bastard Lucas Wykes. At that moment, Arthur knows that Byron is his biggest threat in taking revenge in Lucas. The day of the announcement had been a cold reality check for Arthur. Lucas Wykes, whose insubordination and betrayal led to the most death of the party, used his family's connection to walk free from his atrocities. Arthur had been warned that seeking revenge against Lucas would be suicide, because standing behind him was his older brother, who was not only a powerful mage, but now a lance. But before Arthur enters the academy, Arthur asks the smartest inventor in Dicathan, which is Gideon, for an artifact to hide 2 of his elemental attributes to avoid suspicion from Lucas, who was going to enroll in the academy. Earth and wind magic was the only attributes he had not hid as a student. Together with Arthur, the one who was with him to enter the academy was his friend and former teammates in that adventurer guild, Elijah. Director Cynthia Goodsky, who was taking a liking at Arthur, delivers his speech on the first day of school and introduces the student council. And the president of the student council at that time was Tessia Aerolith, who is the princess of the elven kingdom of Elenwar, who is also the childhood friend and the love interest of Arthur Leywin. Director Cynthia approached Arthur that night and told him that while there is a student council that acts as a shield for the school, she has now created the disciplinary committee, which serves as the sword of the school. She informed Arthur that she wants him to join that committee, and even though the Wykes family desired that spot, she still gave it to Arthur. The next morning, Arthur goes to the office of the disciplinary committee. When he opened the door, a mana beast stood before him, roaring. It was Grotter, the A-class mana beast of Curtis, who is the Prince of Sapin. It was put there to scare off Arthur. But that didn't even scare Arthur, and Sylvie just slaps that mana beast in the head. The first one who approached Arthur was Kai Crestless, who is a fourth-year student. Kai, observing Grotter on the ground after being slapped by Sylvie, began to question what kind of mana beast could reduce Grotter and a rank mana beast to a submissive state. The next one who introduced herself is Doradria Orgward, a dwarf who is a first year and somewhat looks like the childhood friend of Elijah in Arthur's imagination. Another part of the disciplinary committee includes both the prince and the princess of the Sapin Kingdom, Kathleen and Curtis, who is the partner of Grotter. And then there's the prideful Faerith Ivysaur III, who considers Arthur his rival, as part of that committee. Arthur and Faerith first met when they were young, during a carriage ride back to the Kingdom of Sapin from Elenwar. And the leader of that ragtag team is a woman named Claire Bladeheart, who is a 6th-year battle mage student. Her uncle was Caspian Bladeheart, who trained her after she awakened. Then there is this tall and muscular guy, Theodore Maxwell, who said that it seems the disciplinary has stopped low recruiting twerps, and offer his hand to shake Arthur. When Arthur shakes his hands, he felt an intense pressure that pushes him to the ground. It was a gravity magic that it seemed like Theodore is testing him. Arthur knows that if it wasn't for his body's assimilation with Sylvie's beast, he wouldn't be standing right now. But Arthur was standing tall and shaking his hand, and Theodore told Arthur that he is not as bad as he may think. In one of Arthur's classes, the arrogant, deceitful, and treacherous Lucas Wykes and Arthur crossed paths once again. At that time, their teacher is Professor Glory, who is their instructor for Team Fighting Mechanics 1. He was riding in his flare hawk bond named Torch. Professor Glory wants to start her class with something fun like war and conquest. Curtis suggested a team mock battle with 3 disciplinary committees in one team for an opportunity to improve their teamwork. Professor Glory thinks it was a good idea. Then Clive, who is the vice president of the council, suggested that they will be in the opponent team, but still, they are lacking one on a 3 versus 3 fights. That is when Lucas comes in and said that he would become part of the student council team. As everyone was able to wear the protective equipment, the battle is about to commence, and at that time Arthur took the role of the king, so anyone who could take down the king would win in this matchup. Claire Bladeheart and Clive Graves were engaged in a fierce battle, while Tessia and Curtis confronted each other. Arthur was aware that Curtis might not be able to defeat Tessia outright, but he could hold her off long enough. The one who is facing Arthur is no other than Lucas Wykes. Arthur thought that this guy would become more humble since coming to Zyrus, but now that he's facing him, he knows that his guess was wrong. Arthur just stands looking at Lucas. Lucas arrogantly said, "What is taking you so long? Scared that your reputation might crumble after you lose today?" Arthur glanced at Professor Glory and he saw that the professor was focusing on him. By the way, Arthur is already an assistant professor at this time after defeating Professor Geist. Arthur could only smile, thinking that Professor Glory really wanted a show. So, he emitted such a strong pressure that it alarmed Lucas upon feeling it. The other individuals involved in the team battle also sensed it, including the professor, who expressed satisfaction about the development of the battle. Arthur, with full bloodlust, suddenly dashed towards Lucas. The arrogant young man was alarmed about it. That is why he hurriedly chanted a spell to attack Arthur. Lucas Wykes' spell was called Inferno Cage, which creates a massive domain of fire, but Arthur continuously running towards him, aiming to release one wind spell. But fireballs are following the movement of Arthur, which Arthur evaded. Then he used his sword that was embedded with wind magic to parry down one fireball attack. Then he cast an earth magic to block another fireball. Arthur knows that the earth spell will crumble, so he hurriedly avoids it before another fireball explode, which made the earth magic collapse. Gaining momentum, Arthur turned his gaze towards Lucas. However, he noticed a multitude of fireballs in the air surrounding Lucas, ready to be released and launched as an attack against him. The entire area was engulfed in flames, leaving no escape route for Arthur. After Lucas chanted and uttered the command, "Fall," a multitude of fireballs began hurtling towards Arthur. There is no choice for Arthur but to run away, but the fireballs are continuously chasing him away. When a fireball hits the ground, it creates a massive explosion, but Arthur is able to dodge all of it like he was Spider-Man. Lucas, who was happy to see Arthur struggling, said, "That's it, dance for me." As Arthur skillfully evaded the fiery onslaught, Sylvie used telepathy to communicate with him. She informed Arthur that Tessia was gaining the upper hand against Curtis, and Claire had an advantage over Clive, the grumpy guy. Arthur instructed Sylvie to alert him immediately if anything unusual occurred. Arthur uses his earth spell to block one of the incoming fireball and run away to evade it. Arthur noticed that Lucas Wykes' mana pool is much larger compared to when he was an adventurer. Arthur runs toward where Lucas Wykes is standing, but Lucas just smiles at him while he was being protected by a magic barrier. As Arthur approached Lucas, 2 fireballs exploded in front of him, leaving him with no choice but to execute a backflip to avoid the impact. Arthur was aware that without revealing his hidden water or fire attribute, he couldn't withstand that level of heat, and his mana pool wouldn't be able to keep up with it. Lucas smirked and said, "I am glad I didn't join the disciplinary committee. If I were on the same team as someone as incompetent as you, I might have actually quit school." Arthur knows that he cannot conjure a wind spell to go up against the fire spell of Lucas. Arthur cut up the stone slab on his feet using his wind spell and sword, then he kicked it towards Lucas. But that stone just disintegrated before it reaches Lucas when it hit the barrier of fire. Arthur wants to devise a plan to defeat him. In his mind, focus on the fire. Wind magic, to simply put it, was pushing and pulling and manipulating air in order to achieve desired effects. But what if I were to manipulate the air particle themselves? I could get rid of the very thing that fire needs to keep burning, the oxygen. Arthur was on the pinch, and he was continuously evading the attacks of Lucas. Lucas Wykes said, "Is that how you beat the sorry excuse of a professor? Just by running?" Because of that, Arthur starts to question his mind if he would be able to manipulate the oxygen fast enough to extinguish the fire before it hits him, or would he be able to breathe? Arthur smiled because he realized that there is no use of thinking so hard, since the reason why he goes to school to test and improve his skills. Professor Glory was using mana to saw the battle of Arthur and Lucas. In her mind, Lucas is better than what I have heard. Inferno's Cage is one of the toughest flame attributes domain spells, yet he is able to use it so proficiently at such a young age. On top of that, his mana reserves seem to almost rival that of a silver core mage. She could only pat torch, saying that the world is changing and soon oldies like them won't have a place anywhere, especially if they see more kids like Arthur Leywin. While looking at Arthur, she could only think of something. In her mind, he lacks a variation in his spells for a dual elemental mage, but makes up for it with a fluid and tight control. I was only mildly curious about the kid who was able to best a veteran adventurer, even one as careless as Geist. As she remembers the pressure that Arthur released a while ago, she starts to question what kind of life did he live to be able to release that strong pressure at a young age. Arthur stops evading the attack, inhales a small breath, and then holds his breath while wind magic revolves around his body. Some fire attack of Lucas starts to land a hit on Arthur. Professor Glory starts to question what he is doing right now. Is he holding his breath? Professor Glory was somewhat confused because his uniform will go off if he is going to continue like that. Suddenly, she realizes what Arthur is doing as the fire starts to subside before reaching him. She got so excited that she orders Torch to descend, exclaiming that Arthur is truly a monster. In her mind, unlike wind magic, trying to manipulate the air itself involves much more insight and higher levels of concentration and chanting in order to properly spell cast. That is why there aren't any mages who are capable of sucking the air out of their opponent's lungs. It would take hours of concentration to manipulate the air directly inside a moving, living target. That is why mages either use their own body as the source or pre-designated unmovable location. He is keeping his area of effect as close to his body as possible, but even then, to be able to do this in the middle of a fight is unbelievable. What Arthur is doing is manipulating a thin layer of air around my body to form a vacuum and disperse the fire before it hits me. It sure sounded a lot easier in his head, but at the rate he is going, his uniform is going to reach its threshold before he could get a hang of it. The only thing he wants is just to get through the barrier. Lucas, who was confused, starts to ask how was Arthur able to block his spells like that, even thought he don't see any wind magic being used. But for Lucas Wykes, it doesn't matter anymore since he planned to end it by summoning his protector, the Flame Guardian. Looking at Lucas, who summoned his Flame Guardian, made Arthur smile, thinking that Lucas must be reaching his limit. Suddenly, Arthur felt a sudden surge of mana which made him start to question. Sylvie used telepathy to communicate with Arthur, saying Tess was in danger, but the Flame Guardian was approaching Arthur. Arthur was able to block his attack and managed to move away from the Flame Guardian. At that time, Arthur saw Professor Glory, who was in hurry on where the sudden surge of mana happened. At that moment, Arthur realizes that it is something serious. He used his Beast Will once again and used the Static Void to stop time. Arthur, who was using it, has already almost reached its limit since he used most of his mana reserves trying to learn that vacuum barrier spell, which he thinks a stupid move, but the toll of using Static Void is intense. Arthur starts to question if the mana spike was from Curtis, who released his Beast Will, but on the other hand, Tess is losing consciousness while Curtis released that strong attack, and at that time, Tessia doesn't have any sort of protective barrier around her. Before it hit Tessia, Arthur hurriedly ran to cover Tess. Although he knows that it was going to hurt him, he still protected Tess. This middle-aged man is still simping on Tessia, who is almost at the age of a high schooler. The reason why Tess lost consciousness was because of the problem in mana assimilation in her core from the Elderwood Guardian that was given to her by Arthur. And when Professor Glory arrives at the area, he only sees both of them unconscious, and the one that was injured was Arthur at that time. She is confused about what happened and why is Arthur in there. But the battle between Arthur and Lucas was not concluded in this scene. Fast forward, after the class, while Arthur was walking together with Sylvie, there are 3 guys that was following him. It was Lucas and his group. Lucas angrily approaches Arthur, boasting that when they duel, Arthur was just running away with his tail tucked between his legs. Then he asks Arthur how did he do it. Arthur just said some sarcastic answer, but what anger Lucas is that he could not grasp the reason. How did Arthur escape his inferno cage, and how was he able to go at Tessia and get shot at the back in less than a second? Arthur asks him why should he tell him something about that, but the arrogant Lucas just said that maybe Arthur was just using some artifact, since there is no way for someone like Arthur, who is a commoner, to do something like that. He added that maybe Tessia was the one who was giving him the artifact. On the other hand, when Marcois, this abnormal Fatso, starts to act strangely, his body becomes abnormal, claiming that Arthur was seducing Princess Kathleen. This perverted Fatso even sniffs the handkerchief that Princess Kathleen picked up, insisting that the princess gave it to him and that he was the chosen one. Sylvie was communicating with Arthur, saying that something is wrong with that fat guy. Arthur told Sylvie that the amount of mana he is leaking is not normal either. The eyes of Marcois somewhat look like was about to burst, like he became like a zombie. Marcois jumps at Arthur, claiming that he is not the chosen one and should be killed. Sylvie is so angry that she wants to confront this guy, but Arthur tells her to wait since Lucas and the other guy are still there. Marcois attacks Arthur, who tries to block the attack, but the shield breaks, forcing Arthur to evade it, causing the ground to break down. The attack creates a dust cloud, and Arthur asks those guys if they know what they are doing, as it is an offense to attack a disciplinary committee in such a manner. But Lucas, who was the best actor, was pretending that he did not do anything, and in fact, he was terrified. When one of his allies, Charles, asks him about what they are going to do with Marcois, Lucas tells him that he doesn't care whether he was hurt or not, and the disciplinary committee will just have him expelled from school. Then he tells Arthur not to get hurt and to prepare for their next duel before leaving the area. Marcois continuously tries to attack, aiming to kill Arthur. After receiving the attack, Arthur thinks that this guy is much stronger compared to a normal orange core, and he has more mana compared to Lucas, which he uses offensively. He was thinking of releasing his seal to capture him alive without killing him. But Sylvie has already transformed to her original dragon form, and with just one stomp that created a huge noise, Marcois becomes Sleeping Beauty and was pinned on the ground. Arthur was silent and had nothing to say about it. Sylvie told him that she was done waiting. Then their leader Claire Bladeheart hurriedly ran to the scene after hearing it, and she looks at the back of this guy and saw a marking that is the same on some other victims. The next morning, all the disciplinary committee were called for a meeting, and later Arthur was told by Claire that last night Marcois died. In one of the classes of Professor Glory, they were able to enter a dungeon on the upper surface. All of the students in her class were there, including Arthur and Lucas. But there are many anomalies in that dungeon expedition. The first is the anomaly between a mana beast called Snarlers. Although they are E-rank monsters, they are not the type to go and attack in hordes. Because of the concerning behaviors of the Snarlers, Professor Glory wants to stop the excursion for their safety, but a sudden fireball passed by near his head and then exploded. It was the arrogant Lucas again, stating that they don't need to go back since things are just starting to get interesting. The other students, led by Curtis, think that they could still train there, and the others agree, leaving the professor with no choice but to continue. Before that, she grabs Lucas and told him that if he'd do something like that again, there will be consequences in his action. Another anomaly comes is when Queen Snarlers, who was usually on the lower floors, started to attack them, which made the students panic and made Professor Glory take action. While they were trying to escape the dungeon, the worst case was a large monster appeared that could even get Professor Glory into trouble. Arthur knows that if he doesn't help, Professor Glory won't be able to make it out alive. That is why he wants to help, but Curtis tells them that even though he was a dual elemental mage, it was stupid to take action. He told Arthur to just leave it to Professor Glory. That is when he shows his fire element and told them to go. That made everyone shocked to see that even Professor Glory, who saw Arthur using a fire element attacking that monster. At that time, Lucas was at his back, who was trying to escape and see everything. Seeing Arthur able to manipulate blue flames, that adds up to his jealousy towards Arthur. At one time, Lucas Wykes was brought by Charles to a certain organization that looks like some shady cult, and their leader was wearing a mask saying that he is just a mere benefactor who wants the betterment of the continent. The masked man name was Dreneve, who seems to know almost everything about Lucas and his prideful nature, taking advantage of that knowledge. He tells Lucas that despite being a prodigy and receiving pampering with elixirs since his awakening, he is still no match for Arthur. What strikes a nerve with Lucas Wykes is the revelation that Arthur wasn't even trying to fight him seriously. Dreneve tells Lucas that soon he will strike Dicathan, and Arthur is one of the people he wants to be killed. Additionally, he instructs Lucas to take the same drug that Marcois took. Dreneve said that only Marcois suffered because the fat guy is weak, and if Lucas is as strong as he thinks he is, he should be able to control the power from that drug. When Lucas Wykes asks him how he can fight Arthur at full power, the masked man tells him that Arthur Leywin is someone who places great importance on his friends and family, with one person in particular. It's at this point that Lucas realizes that the person in question is none other than Tessia Aerolith, making him happy as he sees it as a good opportunity to now fight Arthur at full strength. After Lucas gets the drugs, he looks down on his fellow members, telling Charles that they were not chosen and are merely messengers stuck babysitting him, following the orders of their leader. Lucas drinks up that drug that can boost their mana power. After he drank it, dark steam came out in his body and he started to fall on his knees from the pain of the side effects. After seeing Lucas fall to his knees, Charles is pleased, stating that Lucas is no different from the pig Marcois who can't handle the effects of the drug. He tells him that Lucas was only strong when hiding behind the power of his family, likening him to a mutt. Charles then stomps on Lucas's head, remarking that if he wants to die, he shouldn't waste their time. But a sudden surge of mana went in and he burned down the feet of Charles and threw him away. Mana surges through his body, and the two magicians who were with Charles are alarmed by the sudden surge of power. Lucas laughs, fueled by the memories of every humiliation, now confident that he can defeat them with his newfound strength. He killed the two cult members that is with Charles with ease, even with them begging him. One is burned to death while the other one was choked by Lucas. Charles, who was crying in agony, was approached by Lucas, telling him to try calling him a mutt once again. Then he killed Charles on the spot. That night, Arthur was together with Tessia going to the Helstia estate where Arthur and his family are staying in. At that moment, the adventurers' party of his mother and father, which is the twin horn, was at the estate. But Tessia told them that he only stopped by to say hello before heading to school because there is a lot of student council work he missed and he needs to meet Director Goodsky. Although Arthur wants to stay with Tessia since his mana are suppressed right now, Tess told him that she is okay if it is just one night. Then Tessia bids his farewell and Arthur joins the party that was held at the Helstia estate. But that night, the shady group headed by the masked man Dreniv plans to commence their attack on Zyrus Academy. However, the biggest threat to their plan at this time, Director Cynthia Goodsky, is nowhere to be found. Later, it is revealed that she was imprisoned after being exposed as a spy sent to Dicathan. While those cult bastards are trying to attack, the members of the disciplinary committee were trying to do their training. All of them were inside the circle and Theodore ordered Kai to turn on the barrier so they can start their training. Claire noticed that something is weird because the barrier is red. Curtis told Kai to shut down the barrier because he thinks there is something wrong, but there is no response. Theodore tried to punch the barrier, but it didn't budge. Princess Kathleen told him to not waste any mana because there must be an emergency kill switch somewhere. Claire said that she is right, that is why she tried to find where it is. But after they found out where the emergency switch is, their expressions turn into gloomy, realizing that the switch was destroyed. Then the men in hoods from that shady cult start to attack. Claire told the disciplinary committee to defend themselves and devise a plan to escape and help Kai. However, the one who arrives is Lucas, stating that they must not still get what is happening, so he told them that the one who trapped all of them inside the barrier is no other than Kai. And Lucas just jumps at them as he is ordered to subdue the disciplinary committee. He easily beat them up. But while he was choking Theodore, a sudden bright light in his artifact was seen and he said that he would leave because there are important matters he needed to do. At that time, Tessia had just arrived in the area and noticed an anomaly as there was a large barrier surrounding the area. She told the person driving the carriage that they needed to go back, but then a sudden explosion occurred. The one who actually attacked her was Lucas, who was happy, saying that he cannot believe that the princess goes to the school alone, which is easier compared to what he expected. With his creepy expression he said, "Hello princess, you look a little lonely." Since Tessia's mana was suppressed, there was no way he could defeat Lucas. Instead, she was beaten down easily by Lucas. Tessia couldn't move her body no matter what she do, and Lucas pulled his hair while he was brought inside the Zyrus Academy to lure down Arthur. The masked guy Dreniv, who is their leader, brought a pouch with a blood dripping from it, and when he threw it out, it was actually the head of Doradria. Doradria became part of the Lollipop family. Seeing his friend and fellow disciplinary committee officer died just like that, Theodore had gone wild to attack that masked man, but the man was just too powerful and he was just smashed down and his leg broke, and then he literally cooked alive Theodore. Elijah, who sees what happened, develop a new power. There is a continuous order in his mind to kill everyone, and he easily kill all those mana beasts with ease. But using that power made Elijah lose consciousness while the other cult wants to attack Elijah. This masked guy took a liking at him and brought Elijah with him, leaving only Lucas in the area. Claire, who wants to get her revenge for Theodore and Elijah, tried to jump and attack Kai, but he was captured by a magical string and her mana core was broke down as a spiky earth magic pinches her stomach. All of this happened, but the MC was nowhere to be found. While losing consciousness, Claire saw Arthur, who was best in late arrived. In her mind, two horns like polished swords protruded from its side of its sharp head. Crystalline scales gleamed so vividly black that its shadow looked gray in comparison, and its eyes glowed with such intelligence and fierceness that even a veteran adventurer would stand frozen. But as awe-inspiring as the dragon was, it was the boy below it that trembled my heart in fear. Every step he took displayed a subtle yet unshakable confidence, and seeping from every inch of his body was a blatant rage, so fierce and violent that my only regret was not being able to see Lucas's expression of defeat in the end. On the other hand, Lucas starts to feel fear. In his mind, I have a higher cognitive processing for higher level casting, a nearly unlimited pool of mana for me to access and utilize with Dreniv's elixir. I have transcended the realm of mortals, and these so-called elites have become nothing more than ants to me. So why do my innards feel like they are being gripped by an icy claw? Lucas shouted, "Nice pet, Arthur. You are just in time for the party." Do you think that overgrown lizard can help you though? Not even the esteemed professors of Zyrus Academy could lay a hand on me. Arthur didn't say anything and continued to walk towards him. Arthur continues to walk and pass by at Lucas together with Sylvie. That hit a nerve with Lucas, making him angry as he felt ignored by Arthur, treated as if he were non-existent. Arthur was actually walking towards Tessia to check her. He checked Tessia and noticed that she was just drugged to keep her unconscious, but aside from a couple of bruises and scrapes, she is fine. To piss off Arthur, Lucas Wykes said, "She was crying for you, you know. Drenive doesn't want me laying a hand on your little elf princess. But I don't think I'm going to listen to him, because what better way to break you than to have you lie helplessly on the ground as you watch me cripple the girl you care so much about." Hearing that made Sylvie angry that her roar was heard all over the area, but Arthur didn't react in that provocation. Lucas was confused why Arthur was still ignoring him. Lucas, who was angry, starts to emit a burning fire in his body. He said, "You dare keep your back turned to me while I talk, peasant? I will break every bone in your body so you can only cry as I violate Tessia right." But while he was saying all those insults, a sudden pressure was felt by Lucas. In his mind, this feeling, it was the same as before. It feels like a mad demon is twisting and clawing at my insides. Why? Why am I reacting this way? Why does this presence instill me with more fear than the esteemed professors of this school, than even my own brother? While releasing that strong pressure and bloodlust, Arthur said, "Lucas, I thought of you as nothing more than a wasp I deemed unnecessary to kill. But if that wasp chose to rear its stinger, even the holiest of saints would swat it down." Lucas felt intense fear and began to sweat. It seemed as if his body was being weighed down by the illusion of fear. In his mind, it is not supposed to be like this. My power should be much greater than his. So how? How can a mere bug instill so much fear within me? How many legions of men and beasts has he killed to possess such a suffocating, oppressive bloodlust? Lucas had gone wild to escape from that suffocating bloodlust of Arthur. Lucas releases a spell called Hell's Rain that approaches Arthur at a fast rate. Sylvie was alarmed by it, but Arthur told him that it is okay and all she needed to do is to protect Tess. Arthur entered the second phase and used an ice spell which easily blocked Lucas' spell. The whole spell was disintegrated easily. Lucas shouted, "It wasn't just fire magic that you were hiding? How can you use ice as well?" Lucas throw a big fire spear at Arthur. Arthur just easily catches that spear. Then he releases a counterattack using lightning magic at him. Lucas was hit by it and his arm was cut off with that attack. Lucas was panting and crying from the intense pain after his hand was fall off. Seeing a lightning magic at Arthur, he asks him if he was a deviant quadra-elemental mage. Arthur grabs Lucas's hand. He looks at him and tells Lucas that yes, he was a quadra-elemental mage. Then he burns the hand of Lucas that turns into solid stone and cracked down. Lucas was crying, telling Arthur that he cannot do something like that since he is Lucas Wykes. Arthur stomped on Lucas' feet, then he used downforce that made the feet of Lucas turn into nothing. There are a lot of blood that splashes, but I will not show it since it was messy and to avoid being banned in YouTube. Arthur asks him, "You mentioned Drenive earlier. Was he responsible for all of this?" Lucas was still arrogant at that time. He replied, "That is right. And you know what else? He took that incompetent fool you call your best friend." You lose, Arthur. The audacity of him to speak arrogantly even after what happened to him. That is why Arthur stomped his other feet and used downforce to break it down. And then Arthur put his feet on the balls of Lucas. Lucas was panicking, asking him, "What is he doing?" Arthur looked down at him. He said, "There will be a change in this world. There is nothing I can do about that. I can at least take measures to ensure your filth won't spread to the next generation." After hearing that, Lucas was crying, asking Arthur to stop what he is doing and that he is sorry. Lucas begged Arthur not to do it. Arthur said, "May your suffering last into your next life." Then Arthur used downforce, and that is the end of Lucas. Their long history of animosity is a tale of deep-seated hatred, and I can confidently say that Lucas deserved everything Arthur did to him. One of the most satisfying death of a villain.